Welcome to today's virtual event, Are Retailers Losing Money on Loyalty Programs, featuring Professor Raghu Iyengar. Raghu is a professor of marketing at the Wharton School and the faculty director of Wharton Customer Analytics, the world's leading academic research center focusing on the practice of data-driven business decision-making. Today's topic is based on his latest large-scale study to better understand the effects and the profitability of customer loyalty programs, which was published by Harvard Business Review. Please welcome Professor Raghu Iyengar.
Great. Thank you so much, Zoe. Pleasure to be here, and good morning to everybody in China. It's evening for me. So what I wanted to do was to basically talk a little bit about my research. I saw a couple of questions that were there before the session. Zoe was kind enough to send it to me. So I'll try to answer them as we go along, but please put your questions. So I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. Okay. Let me just start sharing my screen. So let me know if you can see this. When you think about subscription programs, I think there are many, many kinds of subscription programs out there. Obviously, in the Chinese market, you have a lot of programs. In the Indian market, which is where I'm from, there are also a lot of programs. In this particular case, we ended up working with a company that was actually in the Asian market. I can't mention the name of the company just because we signed an agreement with them. But it's a very big cosmetics company. So I'll talk a little about the program, but please ask me questions, stop as much as you can. So what is the idea of subscription programs? Subscription programs are very, very popular. One-time purchase becomes a recurring sales stream. There are many business to consumer businesses, B2C, that are attracted to more than 11 million, in some sense, US subscribers in 2017. The number is increasing. So if you think about subscription programs, I think it's worthwhile thinking about different kinds of programs. So one kind of program is what I call replenishment programs. And the idea here is, if you, for example, let's take one example up here, which are the Harry's shaving blades, which are up on the top left. What's the idea there? The idea there is, if you wanted shaving cream, you wanted the shaves, the blades and so on, what will you end up doing? You might go to the store, but sometimes you might forget. And so the idea here is that these are programs where every month or every 2 months, whatever the case might be, you might end up, in some sense, setting up a program which sends these things automatically to you. So on the right-hand side, you have your vitamins program. And if you have kids, you might have a diapers program and so on. So in this case, there is absolutely no uncertainty. You know exactly what you're getting. It's basically a monthly replenishment or a reminder in some sense that they keep sending you all that stuff. Here's another kind of program, what I call curation programs. And this is where a lot of action has happened very recently in terms of some of these companies, which I think have a lot of different varieties. Now, if you think about lots of different varieties, what do we see here? What we see here is, if you look at the top one on top, it's Birchbox. What's the idea here? Birchbox, Stitch Fix, Trunk Club. These are all companies that basically try and send you a curated packet of things every month. So in Stitch Fix, for instance, you can put in your information. Let's say you like, you say that you like jackets, you like a nice pair of jeans or shoes or whatever the case might be. Stitch Fix and its algorithms will kind of work on what you put into as an input. And then what will they do? What they will do is that they will come out with, suggestions for what might be things that you might be interested in. But of course, what they're also trying to do in some sense is also try to predict what your preferences are. So typically these programs are what I call curation programs. And the idea here is that there are some things which exactly what you're getting, but there's always some element of surprise. So these programs are very, very popular. There are many startup companies that have been trying to, for example, get all these programs going. Now, the third kind, which is the kind of program that we worked on, and I'll give you many examples. Alibaba VIP 88 program is actually one of these, where the idea is it's basically access programs. What do I mean by that? Let's take an example of Amazon Prime. Okay. Now, Amazon Prime and many other big retailers, what do they try and do? Well, on the one hand, with Amazon Prime, you can buy from Amazon even if you're not a Prime member. So you can imagine, let's say you decide that Raghu Iyengar, decides that I want to buy something from Amazon. They give me a discount perhaps or not. I buy it, I'm happy. But if I'm a Prime member, then I might not just get that particular piece that, or whatever I want to buy. I might also get it under 2 days. And so it kind of provides an extra, in some sense, incentive for me to become an Amazon Prime member. Now, of course, how does Prime work? You typically pay upfront an annual fee. It's about $100 odd. Then what do you get? You get a lot of different kinds of discounts. You get a lot of free shipping and all kinds of different features that you as a consumer may really value. So this is what I'm calling access programs. The idea here is that as companies, you may already have a bunch of members which are part of your quote unquote free program. But then what you'd like to do is to provide something extra, okay, something more exclusive. And so that's the idea of these access programs. And there are many such companies. So the 88 VIP program is one of them. There are many such examples. So, Sephora Flash is another one of them. These are some examples from here in the US, but I'm sure with the 88 VIP and many other programs that are there in China, it's very familiar to many of us in the audience. Again, big picture, what do you end up doing? Big picture, the idea is that you pay upfront, typically a monthly or an annual membership. Once you pay that money, you as a premium member get a lot of different kinds of features or different kinds of services for you. Some of these services, perhaps the free members are getting, but some of these services are exclusive to you. And so the idea here is, in some sense, what the company wants to do is to provide some exclusivity to a certain kind of members. And now the question, of course, for many of these companies, be it Amazon Prime, be it Alibaba 88 VIP, CarePath from CVS, the key question for many of these people, of course, is it profitable? Is it worthwhile actually doing that? So that's the question you wanted to answer. And of course, a big question, of course, is why offer it? So let me give you some examples. These are numbers from Amazon, again, self-stated numbers. So there are companies out there that go ahead and go ahead and survey Amazon Prime members, Amazon non-Prime members, and they try to figure out how much are they spending and so on. So on the left-hand side, we have Amazon Prime members on average spend about $1,300 per year with Amazon. On the right-hand side is the Amazon non-Prime member. They spend about $700. Amazon Prime members buy about 25 times from Amazon as compared to Amazon non-Prime members, which are 17 times. What we also found out from that survey is that 82% of customers said that they'll be happy to shop with Amazon, even if it's a little bit more expensive than the competitors. Why? You can imagine maybe it's convenience because you get the 2-day shipping, you get it very fast. So maybe that's very valuable. And the Amazon Prime retention rate is very high at about 90% or so. I mean, that's an amazing retention rate. Now, if you think about it, there are lots and lots of interesting issues here. On the one hand, you could say, well, if I'm an Amazon Prime manager, I might look at these numbers and then start thinking about what's the value of Amazon Prime. On the one hand, you might say, well, if I have an Amazon Prime customer, he or she gives me revenues of $1,300. I have a non-Prime customer, they give me a revenue of $700. The difference in revenues, which is $600, that's the value of Amazon Prime. And of course, I have to remove the costs and so on and so forth. But of course, as you will see here, as I go along, that view of the world where you're simply looking at how much Prime customers are spending and subtracting what the non-Prime customers are spending is clearly kind of looking at apples and oranges. And I'll discuss why that is the case. So if you think about subscription program, what's the big idea? Typically, the program is offered to everyone. Once you have that program, some people decide, and that's the key part here, some people decide to become members, and some people remain non-members. Now, once that is the case, we can try and compare what these members do with non-subscribers or non-members. So in the Amazon Prime case, the numbers that we just saw, what we were looking at was annual purchases. For the Amazon Prime member, the number was about 1,300. For the non-Prime members, the number was about 600. Now, if you look at that difference, clearly, here are two things that are going on. On the one hand, these differences might be looking at the impact of the program. On the other hand, of course, when we think about Prime and non-Prime members, these are not randomly assigned. some people decide to become a member. And I think this is the key idea, which is if you simply compare members with non-members, you're missing out on the selection issue. So this is what I call as customer self-selection, which is the idea that typically when you think about memberships that you may have, so for example, I have a membership with Netflix, I have a membership with many other services. Now, typically, once you are thinking about becoming a member, what do you end up doing? You perhaps are consuming a lot of videos before, or in Amazon Prime's case, you're consuming a lot of stuff from Amazon. You look at how much you're spending, you decide to become a member. So of course, if I simply compare member and non-member without correcting for the self-selection, we will not get a good sense of what the real value of the program is. So that was the idea that we were trying to get at. So what are the key questions? The first key question is, what is the causal impact of the program? So what we're trying to get at here is, let's think about what is the real impact of the program after taking care of the self-selection. So that was number one. Number two was, what are the kinds of benefits that the program offers and which type of benefit matters to consumers? And are there effects beyond the economic benefits? You can imagine for certain programs that are very exclusive, people may want to, for example, want to become a member because it has, exclusivity. You like being part of a group. So that's one possibility. Another possibility might be that, because people view this company very, in a positive light, you like the fact that becoming a member, it might give you intangible benefits. So are there any effects beyond just the economic benefits? Now, if it's all economic benefit, it may not be that worthwhile for the company. So are there some things that go beyond it? The third one was, of course, and this is the big one, which is when we think about benefits, typically we end up calculating one number. In the example that I gave you earlier, we had 1300 minus 700. And what we were saying was that, look, even if things are fine, if I take the difference between the two, which is $600, that's the impact of the program. Well, that's one number. That's the average. And typically what I tell people is averages can be very misleading. Averages represent nobody. So what is very, very important, and you will see that as we go along, what's extremely important is that you need to look at quote unquote distribution or heterogeneity across customers. It's critical that we don't look at an average customer. We don't look at one number, but we look at the entire distribution. So that's where you will find, as we started this talk with, this is exactly where you will find, for example, where a lot of retailers might end up losing money from the loyalty program because they're not looking at the entire distribution, but they're looking at just one number. I want to just pause for a second just to see if there are any questions. As Zoe mentioned in the Q&A, please put in your questions. If there are any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to chat as questions come along. So please go ahead and put in any questions. I'll be very happy to answer them. Now, there were already some questions that had come along before. So I'm going to just, Zoe had sent some questions before, which was there in chat. So what I wanted to do was to just kind of end up looking at some of these questions. So I think that will be very helpful. So I'm going to answer some of these questions as we go along. What are the ways, I'm just looking at some questions here. What is the biggest differentiator or driver of a successful membership program? I think the biggest differentiator in my mind is, as you think about a membership program, what is it that keeps people coming back again and again? Because when we think about subscriptions or membership, it's about a relationship that continues for many, many times. And so if you're in some sense giving them small amount of benefit one time, it may not be enough. So think about what is that virtual cycle that you can build. So for example, Jeff Bezos, again, an Amazon example, used to say the following, that whenever we win a Golden Globe, people buy more shoes. And it's kind of odd when you hear that. What's the idea here? The idea here is that when people see the Golden Globes or the Oscars, they see that it's an Amazon movie, they go to Prime Video, they decide to become a member. As soon as they decide to become a member, they see all the other benefits being offered. So it becomes a virtual cycle. So that's what you want to think about. What exactly is something different about your program that makes people come back again and again? Let me take another question. How do retailers earn money from their loyalty program? So that's another one. Well, when you think about how retailers earn money, there can be two ways. One is, of course, if it's a paid loyalty program. I'll show you an example in a second. If you think about a paid loyalty program, of course, people are making money because customers are paying upfront. But of course, at the same time, what you also want to make sure is that when you're thinking about a paid loyalty program, when you pass on many discounts to consumers, after taking care of those discounts, after taking care of the shipping fee, perhaps not all customers are profitable. So that's going to be a key point, which is, yes, there is a possibility of making money, because typically what you find is that members increase their purchases as time goes along. But what's also very important is that, it's very, very important to kind of make sure that you are paying very close attention to what are the costs of serving customers. I'll come back to this idea again. All right. So I'm looking at these questions. Let me keep going back and forth. So we will continue with our journey in the PowerPoint. And then I'll also keep coming back to some of the questions that you already have. And in the meanwhile, if you have other questions, please put it up here as well. All right. So just to give you an example of where this work has come. So as Zoe mentioned, we recently published this work and some of its findings in the Harvard Business Review. So this was the article on the left. This is with two of my co-authors, Young-Hoon Park, who is a professor at Cornell, and Chi Yu, who was a PhD student here, but she's now a professor at Singapore Management University. So the thing on the left is the Harvard Business Review article. The thing on the right that you see is in Journal of Marketing Research, which is a research outlet, of course. So if you're interested, I'm very happy to give Zoe the research paper if you want to read more about it. All right. So let's jump into our context. Now, in our context, this is in the beauty industry. Again, in the Asian country that we got this data from, I can't mention the name, but the beauty industry is very competitive. Now, one of the things that the company that we work with, which is a very large company, so it's a very well-established company, the company already had a free loyalty program. So this is the key part. So the company already had a loyalty program, which customers could get into without paying anything. But what the company wanted to do was to provide more exclusive offers to customers if they are willing to pay for the loyalty program. So you can think of this as paid loyalty program. You can think of this as subscription program, access program, whatever you're comfortable with. So the idea here is, in this case, the company was asking customers to pay $50 upfront over the whole year. What are the benefits that people get? Let's start from the bottom. You get special discounts, promotions. You get free samples. So it's a beauty product. So if you get free samples, you get free shipping. Okay, so that's typically the one that comes from Amazon as well. But here's the interesting part. They were getting $3 monthly gift cards, but they were also getting a $50 gift card right away. Now, think about the following. On the one hand, you're asking customers to pay $50 upfront. On the other hand, you're also saying that you will give them back a $50 gift card. So net, if you think about it from a customer point of view, they're spending nothing. So what's the point here? The point here, in some sense, is that if you think about the $50 that they paid upfront, in some sense, by giving them a $50 gift card, you've actually made their money non-fungible. So imagine you buy a lot of things in Sephora, or you buy something else in some other company. What is this particular program doing? This program is basically saying, give me the $50, I'll give you a gift card, but all the other things that you're going to buy elsewhere, now you might end up buying here. So think of the $50 as a sunk cost in some sense. You're putting in the money, you're locking in the customer, and now the customer might be more likely to buy more things from you, not just because he or she is finding new things, but the other things that they were buying at competitors, they might end up buying from you. Okay, so that was the basic idea. Now, what data do we have? Again, this is very important. When some of us here in the audience might be thinking about starting subscription programs, or you may have your own subscription programs, or you might be thinking about starting a paid subscription program. What's important is, before you do anything, look at the data that you have historically in as clear and clean a fashion as you can. So let's look at what data we had. We had data for about 2 years or so before the company started a subscription program, a paid subscription program. We had individual level data, Again, this is very important. As much as possible, get individual level data. We had data for the customer, what time did they buy certain product, how much did they buy, what was the price that were paid. We had lots of information. So let's have a look at the data in a little bit more detail. So we had about 20,000 customers that were in the program between December 2015, which is when the program started, and March 2017. Okay, so almost year and a half of the program. And we had the entire population of customers that became part of the program. So I think that's important to look at, which is very, very important. And I see a question here as well, so I'm going to answer that. It's very, very important in some sense when you think about the type of program that we're generating here. The more data you can collect before you start the program, the better it is. So I see a question here: when do you choose a fee loyalty program, spend later, or a no fee loyalty program, spend first? I think this is a great question. So what we did here was, in some sense, we had a loyalty program where we had imposed some money, or at least the company had imposed some money right up front. And the idea here was that as soon as you, in some sense, lock in the money from the customer, you might end up seeing what is called as a sunk cost, which is this idea that now that I have paid money up front, I better make use of it. And what do you typically see? As people make use of the program, they start buying more, they see more value in it. So in fact, in our case, we strongly believe that many of our results that you will see as you go on is because of the fact that the company was asking people to pay upfront. So I think one has to think very carefully. Obviously, the number of people that will pay upfront may be less, but the people who do actually pay, you might end up actually seeing a lot higher purchases as they are already committed to the program. So very good point. How to create a loyalty program appeal to many, but also people make very, very good point. So here's one thing that we had done here with this company. If you look at the question is, how do you create a loyalty program that might be very appealing, but at the same time makes people special? I think the key idea here also is, of course, making sure that as much as possible, you can try to create some exclusive offers. So there are certain set of things that are offered for free. So in this case, for this company, their free loyalty program already was giving some discounts. But what they particularly wanted to do was to make sure that their customers who really shop with them very much so, they get additional discounts, they get additional exclusive offers. They were getting lots of free samples of very high-end products. So I think thinking carefully again about what is it that you can do which gives people discount, but also create an extra layer of exclusivity. So think of it like a nightclub. When you go to a nightclub, what do you end up doing? Well, you enter in, you pay some money, you enter. But of course, at the end of the day, there's also a separate VIP area. And that is either you pay a lot of money or you need to have connections. And so thinking about what is it that you can do that can create that VIP experience, that's very important. Okay. So please keep your questions coming. Very happy to see questions coming along. So please keep them coming, and I'll try as much as possible to make sure that I've answered all of them as well. Okay. So I think I answered this one, I answered that one. So please keep them coming. All right. So let me keep going back here. Now, when I think about the data itself, let's make sure that we are all very clear what the data is. I had about 20,000 members of the paid loyalty program. And now I also have 15,000 customers that basically did not become members of this program. So these were customers who were part of the free loyalty program, but did not decide to become part of the paid loyalty program. Okay, so free loyalty program was already there. Paid loyalty program, as I'll show you, got introduced. Some customers decided that they like the paid loyalty program. Some customers said, I'm happy with the free loyalty program. So we had all this information. And for the customers who became part of the paid loyalty program, we also had information in terms of thinking about what is it that they are redeeming their monthly gift card, free samples, and so on. I see another question here: success and failure in developing countries. What are the key factors? I think it's a great point. One of the things that you will see here is, I think a lot of careful analysis needs to be done before you decide to perhaps either start a loyalty program or not. So what does that mean? As much data as you can gather. And that's, I think, I come from India. So if you think about it, getting granular level, individual level India in data in India is becoming much harder. But at the same time, a lot of action is now happening through mobile phones. So the more care you can make sure that you can get a lot of good data through either the mobile phone or surveys and things of that nature, the better it will be. So I hope that helps the question. So what do we see here? The x-axis here, the horizontal axis here is time. So we have the program started in December 2015, which is right up on the left side. And we have data till March 2016, so which is on the other side, or 2017, sorry, which is on the side here. Now, the vertical axis is the number of people that joined the program. Okay, so we have the entire population. These are all the people that joined the program. Now, what are the vertical bars? So in every month, for example, December 2015, about 700 people joined. In January, about 450 people joined, and so on. In our main analysis, we ended up choosing 1 month. Okay, and we did lots of other kind of analyses as well. I won't talk much about it. If you're interested, I will send the academic paper to Zoe. She can perhaps share it with other people if you're interested. Now, we chose April as our main analysis. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is you will see some examples as we go forward. What you will see there is that when I talk about people becoming members, I in particular mean people who became members in April. So keep that in mind. In the main analysis, when I talk about members, these are people who became members in April. Non-members are people who decided not to become members at any time between December 2015 to March 2017. So these people who were the non-members, they did not become members of the paid program during the entire data period. Okay. Great point. So wonderful. Can we assume the low frequency of Groupon model would be a low cost way of creating? Very, very good point. So I see a question here as well, the Groupon model, and can we create exclusivity? I think it's a great point, but I think what is also very important is to think carefully about the cost side of the Groupon. So on the one hand, there is exclusivity, of course, the fact that you have low frequency of Groupon, only a few people can get access to it. But just to make sure, on the flip side, you also understand the operational costs. I think what I've seen time and again is that, yes, exclusivity upfront is great. You will see that here in this example as well. But many times people forget that there is a cost of serving these customers. So I think it's very important to make sure that you understand the cost of serving as well. Are the loyalty programs relevant to products? Absolutely. Depending upon what your products are. So you will notice in the example that we have here, actually, this was a company that is a skincare or a beauty company. So they had lots of different kinds of products. So depending upon what kind of products you're thinking about, typically, if it's a product which in some sense, for example, is something that you occasionally buy, that might be hard. Because if it's a very exclusive, you're not buying that product very often, then I think a loyalty program is going to be very hard. But if it's a product that you buy more frequently, then I think certainly you can think about having loyalty programs for that as well. So I hope that answers the point. Great. So let's keep going. What do we see here? Again, let me just make sure everybody's seeing the figure properly. The x-axis here is time, which is again starting from December, so on and so forth. The y-axis here is purchase amount. And what do we see here? What is important is the following. When you look at the black line, which is the solid black line, those are members. When you look at the dashed line, those are non-members. Now, what do we see here? A couple of things. Remember, when I said members, these are people who became members in April 2016. So let me highlight that. What do we see? As soon as people become members, they typically buy a lot, which is not very surprising. They were perhaps going to buy a lot, they became members, or as soon as they became members, they get very excited. They usually buy a lot. But what I want you to focus on is what happens before and what happens after. Now, a couple of things. Let's first look at what happens after on this side. What happens after? Well, what you notice is that even after they've bought a lot before, at some point you see diminishing returns, which is there's a lot of excitement initially. Over time, the excitement dies. But in this case, and that's good news for this company, it looks like that even though initially there was a lot of excitement and it started settling down, it did not settle down to 0. So look at the difference between the two lines. It's still non-zero. So that's good news. The bottom line again are non-members. The top line again are members. Another thing I wanted to focus on. Look at the lines before people became members. What do we see here? What we see here is that these people were different even before they became members. So that's the key point. If you think about, again, the Amazon Prime example I was giving you, 1300 minus 700. Now, if you look at that comparison that we had done when we started the session, that comparison was only looking at what happens after people become members. The key point here is that if you only look at this comparison, unfortunately, you're missing out on the fact that these people were different to begin with. So this is the idea of self-selection, that people who are buying a lot from you are the ones that will become members. So if you simply just take the difference between the two, you're missing out on the self-selection. So I see another question here. Very good. Do you have any cases on top of your mind that did very well in personalizing benefits or offers to members based? Very good point. So I see a question here on chat. I think there are many companies. In fact, people claim that Stitch Fix, for example, is a good one. Even though they've had some issues recently, so they've been very, very good. So it's a company, Stitch Fix, that basically allows lots of customization. So that's one. Other companies, for example, Amazon, of course, for sure, they have a lot of personal benefits. So for example, if you're a frequent user of Amazon versus not, you get lots different kinds of benefits. So there are many examples, if you think about it, where the data is being used very carefully in terms of giving lots of promotions. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you. So very quickly, again, this is just some analysis which is showing exactly what we saw visually, which is people are different. Zoe says, very good point. So Costco's annual membership fee generated 80% of the profit, while the percentage of profits are low for Costco. Is the membership dues a successful model for the retailers? This is a very interesting point. I think what membership dues do, apart from just profitability per se, is they make people, quote unquote, buy more frequently and become more engaged. And so in that sense, when you think about, obviously, the membership model in this case for Costco, of course, it's a huge amount of money. But I think more than anything else, I think it makes people a lot more loyal to Costco because they've already locked in their amount of money. So imagine the following, right? So Costco's, you pay a monthly fee or an annual fee at Costco, and you're thinking about what to buy. Typically you will end up putting all your purchases together and go to Costco. So the Costco effect, so to speak, is because you have paid up front, you end up, in some sense, even if there are other places you could have bought, because you paid upfront, you end up, quote unquote, justifying going to Costco in that way. Okay, so I hope that answers the question. So quick numbers. Again, I don't want to go into too much detail here. I want to make sure that people are getting the big picture. Quick kind of detail. Comparing members and non-members, if we just directly compare them, which is in the bottom here, sorry to go back and forth. If I just simply compare this difference, it's about $40 or so. But notice that difference does not take into account the fact that people were different before. So the analysis in the bottom, it's called difference in difference analysis, which is it's taking the difference that happens between the two lines afterwards, and it's removing the difference in the two lines before. So that drops down to about $33. But it's still not enough. Why? Because the very fact that you're simply comparing members and non-members, you are still comparing apples to oranges. So I'll talk a little bit about what we did to control for the selection effect. So what is the big idea? The big issue is find matches between members and non-members to control for selection. What is the big hurdle? The big hurdle is there are hundreds of variables you may have in your data where you want to find a match between member and non-member. So what's the idea here? The idea is the following. Suppose I decide to become a member of this particular service. What I would like to do is to find somebody just like me, had the same purchases, had all the things that were the same, but decided not to become a member. So that way, when I compare my purchases, a member's purchases with that person's purchases afterwards, that gives me a good comparison. So we are trying to find basically matches. And this is where machine learning came into the picture. I won't go into too much detail, but this idea of random forest, for those of us who might be comfortable with machine learning, you will recognize random forest. If you're not comfortable, it's not a big deal. The basic idea was that you wanted to find lookalikes. So what's the idea of lookalikes? For example, a member like this is a person, Ryan Gosling. He's a movie star. And so what do you want to do? Suppose this person decides to become a member. You want to find, with all the data that you have, somebody just like him who decided not to become a member. So for example, that person might look like this. Okay, no, I'm just joking, just kidding. That's me. No. So in reality, this person might look like this. Say this person on the right is actually an accountant from Germany, apparently. So member, non-member. So what are we trying to do? What we're trying to do is to find lookalikes. Basically, for every person who became a member, let's try to find somebody else who remained a non-member. And the good news is that if you have a good amount of data, you can find these non-members in your data. So the key story here is, how can I use the data efficiently in a way that we can find these comparisons? Renee asks, hi, Professor, can you talk a little bit about how to set the membership price? What is it that you should be thinking about? Great point, Renee. So I think there are lots and lots of issues. One is, of course, you have to think a little bit. In this case, for example, the company, we were not involved in setting up the price, but I can tell you lots of things that went into it. So one, you want to make sure that when you do the conjoint or the willingness to pay and things of that nature, so you want to think about, for example, what is the price at which there is a certain amount of people that can come in, but not everybody can come in, because obviously you want to maintain the exclusivity. So you want to look at what proportion of people. So for instance, as an example, in the typical, for example, freemium model, there are many companies out there that do the freemium model, which is there are some things that are for free, but then you pay up and you get exclusive offers. Typically, the freemium percentage is about 5 to 7%. So if you make things so low that everybody can get in, you lose that exclusivity. If you make the thing so high that nobody can get in, obviously that's not very helpful. So you'll have to experiment a little bit with understanding the willingness to pay and what percentage of consumers still have that quote unquote exclusivity there. So that's number one. Number two, what you also want to make sure of is that, when you pay upfront, there is certain value that these customers can get as they buy different products from your company. So for instance, imagine Costco decided, it charges about $100 odd dollars. Costco decided, I'm going to charge $1,000. Obviously, it will not be very worthwhile for many customers. Why? Because even though there might be a few customers that spend a lot of money from Costco, but $1,000, of course, is going to be very difficult for many customers. So thinking about, for example, what are the type of customers you're serving? What is their typical disposable income? How much are they willing to pay for exclusivity, so to speak? I think that's where it's very important. I hope this helps, Rennie. Thank you. So I won't go into too much detail here. Basically, the idea is the following, that I want to show you pictorially more than anything else. What does the method do? What the method does is basically think of the member as the circle in red. The non-members are circles in gray. What is the method trying to do? The method is trying to basically look at each member, the circle in red, and try to find all other non-members, the circles in gray, that are similar to that person. So as a result of which, rather than looking at member and non-member on average, you start looking at that member and an appropriate non-member. So again, let's go back to that example I was giving earlier. If I'm becoming a member, what this method is trying to do, the random forest, is trying to find somebody like me that is similar on every dimension, but did not decide to become a member. So that way, when I take the difference between me and that other person, that is controlling for self-selection, which is everything else has been equalized, and now I want to see what happens. So there were lots and lots of variables that we used. So for example, we had information on how long these people were with the company, what are the typical purchases that they were having in terms of the breadth, the depth, the basket size, all of these things. And again, just to make sure, this is the key value of our method, where if you have data from the past, you can start using that data more effectively to make sure to understand who to kind of quote unquote give that exclusive offer to and who not to give that exclusive offer to. Okay. Let me take another question from here that was from the past. I think Zoe had, as I had mentioned, had sent me a bunch of questions. So I just want to take another one. For example, one question is what metrics to put into consideration when retailers design loyalty programs. I think the question that you have to think about is, again, many times when you design loyalty programs, many people think typically about the revenue side of things. How often do you buy? How many items are you buying? All of those are important things, but don't forget about the cost side of things. So for example, if you look at Amazon or any of these companies, the ones that I just mentioned before as well, obviously when you're offering free shipping, that can come at a huge cost. What is the cost? The cost is that many of these companies now are training their customers to basically order whenever they want. And that's not good news for the company, because every time somebody orders, yes, they're giving you money, but you as a company are paying for the shipping cost. So I think it's this careful kind of trade-off between how often do you want them to buy, how much do you want them to buy, and what is the shipping costs and shipping benefits that you're offering. I think those are the kinds of things you want to think about. And I'll give you this example of cost as we keep going along. So here are the kinds of things that are important when we start looking at finding these matches. But I think in some sense, the most interesting graph is this one. So what are we seeing here? Again, the x-axis here is time. The y-axis is the purchase amount. The line in black, or the solid line, sorry, is members. The dashed line, here's the important part, are matched non-members. So what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, notice these two lines before they became members. These two lines are pretty much on top of each other. What does that mean? What that means is that for every member, we were able to find a non-member that is pretty much like that person. So as a result of which, now when I make this comparison of looking at what's happening after, I have controlled for what was happening before. So that was the key idea of using machine learning here. Because you have lots of variables, you want to use an appropriate model that can help make that comparison. What do we find? So let's start getting into the results. What we find is, there's a big, drop from about $40 or so to almost to $27 when we look at the purchase amount, after accounting for self-selection and after accounting for the fact that you're taking the difference of differences, which is you're subtracting or taking the difference from after, subtracted from the before difference, and now also account for self-selection. So we have about $27. People buy more frequently. What's interesting here is that the basket size comes down. What's the idea here? You can perhaps think about the services that you are a member of. Typically, when I look at my own services, so when I buy from a company which offers free shipping, what do? Well, I say, well, I wanted certain, like for example, very recently, we ordered some cartridges for printers. We ordered some other things. I forgot something else. I ordered it immediately. But every time I order, even though the company is, of course, getting a lot more money, they're also losing money on the shipping fee. And so as the basket size goes down every time, the more frequently somebody buys, unfortunately, as the company, you're paying money for shipping. And that's where we might end up incurring a lot more costs than the revenues. Now, what do we see? What we see here is now in terms of purchase amount. So what is the idea here? What we find is that people not only are spending more, they're spending more on new categories as well, okay, and new products as well. So that's good news for the company. What the company is happy with is that people start trying out new products. That's the advantage of becoming a member. So the idea would be the following. Let's imagine I was using some skincare cream, and then I start looking around. I say, well, now that I'm paying money to this company, let me also buy my lipstick there. Let me also buy my facial cream there. And you start increasing the number of products that you buy. And so, for example, here's an example of a person, customer one up on top. If you look at the lines in white, these are before they became members, and the lines in gray is after they became members. So what do we see? Customer one only bought a cleansing cream before they became a member, but after they became a member, they were buying the cleansing cream, but they were also buying other products. Similarly, customer two, they were buying things in makeup, creamy lip balm. They were still buying that afterwards, but they have started increasing a lot more categories. So they're buying not just in makeup, they're buying in skincare, hair care, and so on and so forth. So this is some big kind of story that you find, which is after people become members, typically not only do they buy more, more frequently, but also across many different categories. So variety seeking is a lot more. One more example, this is a person who bought a lot more from the company after they became a member. So before they became a member, they were buying sunscreens, facial masks, and notice what happens after. They're buying the sunscreens and the facial mask, but they're buying so many other things as well. So that's a big advantage of becoming a member. You can, from a company's point of view, they're able to offer lots of different variety. And as a member, you're trying out different variety. But now you have to also start thinking in terms of the cost of serving the customer. So we will see that as well. Now, one thing that we find here, this is an important part. One thing that we find is, of course, when I give you the average number, about $27, things were positive. But what you notice, and what am I showing you here? The x-axis here is the change, the revenue amount. This is the histogram across all customers. And what do we notice? There are huge differences across people. So if you remember one thing out of this particular seminar or session, please take the following thing away. When you're looking at subscription programs, don't just look at averages. Look at what is happening across people. Because clearly in this case, there are lots and lots of people who are spending some good amount of money, but there are also lots of people that actually did not increase as much. And when we look at the average, which is about $27 here, this is the average. Clearly, the average is not capturing this huge distribution across people. And I think the real potential of careful analysis is in the distribution across people. So that's one thing I wanted to take away. Okay, so 8% of people spend more than $50. About 20% of people spend less than $50. So I think it's this big deviation across the average. That's the key point. Now, what we also find is that there are also long-term effects over time. And obviously, as you see over time, things die down. Initially, it's about $40. Then it comes down to about $29. And about 5 months or so, it's come down to about $25. Not very surprising. Over time, anything that you start off, initially people become very excited. Over time, things kind of novelty dries down, and then they kind of stagnate a little bit. But what's interesting is that even after 5-6 months or so, they stagnate at clearly a good amount, which is about $25 or so, which is obviously very different from and significantly different from zero, which is quote unquote the baseline amount. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about profitability, and this is the key part. So when we think about profitability, and this is something that many companies don't think about, unfortunately, when they're thinking about a subscription program. They get very excited on the revenue side of things, but unfortunately, they don't see the cost side of things. So here's an example where we actually worked very closely with the company to figure out what are the costs numbers and so on. So what are the profit numbers? First, of course, increased revenue. And we can also look at, for example, the cost of goods sold. We know exactly how much the cost of the goods sold is. Here are the cost parts, which are the important ones. First of all is the shipping fee. Second is gift cards, because they're giving away $3 gift cards per month. Third is what free samples are they using. So we could calculate, for example, if they gave a free sample of a very expensive skincare lotion or so on and so forth, we are able to calculate, for example, how much that particular free sample would be. Okay, from a company's point of view. So what did we do here? The x-axis here is cost, y-axis here is profit. And what we find is that there are 3 segments of customers. If you look at this segmentation, it tells you there are some customers for whom profit is high, but the cost is high as well. There's some segments of customers for whom profit is high, but the cost is low. And then there is a third group of people for whom both profit and cost are both low. Why do I say this? So if you look at these numbers, what's very important to think about is, who are these people, segment 1, who give you a lot of profit at actually the gross profit at actually pretty low cost. So when you start carefully thinking about the revenue side, but also include the operational cost side, that's when a slightly different picture starts to emerge. Because once we put all of this information in, what we found was that there was a large number of customers, about 20% or so, that actually were not profitable. And I think that's the key takeaway. which is on average, the company was making money, but that doesn't mean that they were making money on all customers. So again, always think about the distribution, think about the operational costs, and not all customers are valuable to have as a subscriber. So thinking carefully about who are those customers that give you a lot of money, but actually are low cost to serve, that's where the real action is. So what we did after that is we started trying to see where is this effect coming from? Is it because of, for example, the economic effects, which is the price coupons and all of that? Is it because of the non-economic effects? I won't go into the details here. If you're interested, again, you can have a look at the paper. What we were able to do was the following, using that model. What we were able to do was, out of the overall $25 or $27 on average, about $17 or almost $18 is because of the non-economic effects, which is even after taking out the gift card, even after taking care of the price promotion. I think it's very, very important how the program was designed. So somebody had asked a question early on in today's session about should you be paying upfront or pay later? I think the upfront payment, I think, is a very important part of this program, because what it's doing is it's basically locking people in. It's the sunk cost fallacy. That's what they call it, which is because you've paid, you start thinking about all the other things that you want to buy that you are buying elsewhere. So what we notice is a large chunk, about 65% of the chunk of the overall effects is coming from these kinds of effects, the intangible effects. So to me, that is where the real value of subscriptions is, where you can start thinking carefully about how much price discount to offer. Obviously, that's important. But what you notice is even beyond the price discounts, it's this lock-in effect that is really important. Okay? So what have we done here, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and I'll take some other questions as well. What we've done here is we've established a causal relationship between consumers' adoption of a subscription program and subsequent behavior. What do we find here? Consumers increase their purchase after joining. That's very important. Number of orders increase. There are monthly purchases increase. All of these are great things. But what's also very important, and I'll stop here for a second and I'll take some questions. What's also very important to take away is the cost side of things. So again, big picture, if I have to think about what are the big things I want you to take away, the number one thing, don't settle for averages. It's extremely important to look at the entire distribution. So that's point number one. Number two, when you're looking at the revenue side of things, that's an important way to start. Don't forget the cost side of things. Because when you think about customers, not all customers are worthwhile having. And number three is when you start thinking about subscription programs and start thinking about exclusive offers, think about who are the right customers to send this out to. It may not be the case that everyone, quote unquote, should be sent out to this program and some people get in. You have to think carefully about who are the right people. I see there are some questions here. Let me just pause for a second. Great. Great point. Renee has a question about industry differences, purchase frequency. Very, very good point, Renee. I think it's a very good point. When you start thinking about these frequency questions and so on and so forth, great point. When you start thinking about the frequency, the reason it matters is because, again, depending upon what kind of program it is, in our case, for example, when we started thinking about frequency, the big issue was, of course, the shipping costs. So depending upon, for instance, McDonald's, McDonald's, for example, there were lots of discussions during the pandemic that was going on about how they had, I believe it was with, I forget the name of the company they had signed on with in terms of delivering if somebody orders a McDonald's burger or whatever it is. And there were lots of negotiations going on in terms of how much cut should that particular delivery person get. So if you think about these kinds of programs, so Taco Bell, for example, had started off a program as well. More recently, Panera Bread had started off a program in the US as well. I think the big thing is what exactly is the program doing? Who is it, quote unquote, bringing people into the store? Are these people the low revenue people? Are these people the high revenue people? And when you start looking at the behavior, I think that's where the real nuance is. So for example, should it be, for example, are there some programs which might perhaps convert loyalty points into membership points? And so that might be one value of that program. But of course, those kinds of programs might be great if these are people who are frequently coming into the company. So I think you bring up a great point. My answer to that would be, Renee, to you, is that as you start thinking about this frequency versus, for example, as you say here, low ticket versus frequency, exactly who is that program, take a particular type of design, who is that program bringing into the store, and how should that change? I hope that answers. Hi, Professor Iyengar. Once in a while, we consider offering some of the membership benefits to non-members. Very, very good point. I think, so this is Diane's question. Great point. Now, if you think about these kinds of programs which start offering some of the things to non-members, what you want to be a little bit careful about is how much do these members start, quote unquote, devaluing those exclusive offers as they see other people who perhaps are not part of the loyalty program as much, or have not spent as much money with the company, or are not as loyal to the company. So I think the key thing here you have to make sure of is there's not as much, quote unquote, spillover from one group to another. And if that is lower, I think that's totally fine. So I'll give you a very concrete example away from these membership programs. When Porsche came out to the market with their SUV, Porsche Cayenne, they've been very successful. But when they first came out of the market, there was a huge backlash from the Porsche sports car customers, because they basically said, we buy a Porsche because, it's a sports car. And suddenly I see Porsche SUVs. So that might end up damaging the whole brand. So they had to work a lot to bring out the advertising campaign and all of that. And the whole idea of the campaign was, under the hood, it's still a Porsche engine. And so it was SUVs that can go at high speed, and they have like right maneuvering and so on. So thinking about that would be important. Okay. Now I see here another question. We work with both established and insurgent brands. Many of them have been trying to create an effective, Can you share the best and worst cases of loyalty programs you see in the US? I think it's a great point. One of the best examples I've seen of loyalty programs, and I think that has been very, very successful, and they've been very well publicized as well, is the Starbucks program. So Starbucks has made it very easy for people to perhaps use the loyalty point. They've made some changes as well. But if you look at the Starbucks loyalty program, that has been extremely effective in terms of making sure that people can find value in the program. They actually strive for getting some of these points and so on and so forth. So that's a very good program. Second, I think in terms of the worst cases, it's a little hard to come up with a program. I mean, there are many examples of programs. I'll have to think a little bit. But I would say let's start with the best cases first. So Starbucks would be a good example to kind of emulate. Let me think a little bit about really bad ones that may not have worked as well. And if I come to it, if I think about it in the next few minutes or so, I'll certainly bring it up. Yes, great point. So I see, for example, holding costs and so on. Very good question. So I see it on chat. I think so. In this case, the holding costs were not as much of an issue, just because this company was vertically integrated. But absolutely, so if you have a subscription program and you are dealing with the cost of the program, one cost of the program would be the inventory or the holding costs. And the reason I bring this up is, and especially if you look at the news, at least Amazon in the US, it's being beaten up just because they predicted that a lot more people will buy. And what did they do? They ended up hiring a lot more workers. They ended up hiring a lot more space, warehouses, and they're having huge issues in terms of profitability just because they over predicted how much people would buy. So absolutely, you have to think very carefully about inventory costs. You have to think about the space that you might have and so on. Do retailers treat these types of customers differently based on the data? How do consumer profiles? Very good point. No, ideally, what I would say is the following, that when you start thinking about customer profitability, of course, in our case, we looked at about 1 year of data. One of my colleagues, who is a world leader in customer lifetime value, Pete Fader, he's done a huge amount of work with many companies to start looking at not just, for example, look at data where you're looking at 1 year, but perhaps look at data in terms of retention. How many customers stay with you? How many customers leave your company? And so on. So absolutely, when you start thinking about customer lifetime value, which is not just how much the customer is spending with you today, but in the future, I think once you start combining lifetime value with good decisions, that's where you can start finding the real quote unquote diamonds in the rough. What do I mean? When you look at customers who perhaps have low customer lifetime value, these are people that are not profitable in the long run. Well, you can offer them service which is not as high quality as you're offering your better members. So in some sense, you don't really have to fire customers. That's the term that some people have used. You, in some sense, decide the type of the level of service that should be offered to these customers should be different. So I think thinking about what might be ways in which you can, in some sense, differentiate not just the offerings, but also the level of customer service, that's where the real value is. And last one, any tips for brand with low frequency, high ASP and small portfolio? For example, Dyson, great question. I think when you start thinking about Dyson, on very broadly thinking about companies where very low frequency, but obviously, it's a small portfolio. I think you have to start thinking about additional benefits that you can offer. And I think, for example, when you think about Dyson and so on and so forth, they do a huge amount of customer education. Why are they doing that? Because they want to keep the customers kind of in their minds, at least. They want to keep up the excitement of the customers around new products that are coming along. They perhaps can partner with other companies that perhaps are along the same thing. In this case, Dyson, obviously, it's about cleaning and vacuums and so on and so forth. So they can start thinking about those things as well. How does Wharton Customer Analytics work with retailers and brands? So great question. Now, absolutely. So where we work, we are a research kind of center within Wharton. So myself, I'm the faculty director. Mary Perk is the executive director of my center. And we have an amazing staff that works in the center who is very excited with working with companies and brands who also are looking for good partnerships with the school. What do? We actually end up pairing a lot of companies together with, if they have projects and so on, if you have some good data, but you don't have, for example, the bandwidth to analyze the data fully, or you're thinking about what good questions you should be asking, we end up typically having a 2-year partnership. Now, when you start thinking about the 2-year partnership, what do we end up doing? We work with the company very carefully to hone a particular problem and pair that company up together with students who will solve that problem. So it's a great way to get actionable results. It's a great way to build awareness for your company within Wharton students and Penn students in general. It's a great way for recruiting. And so we believe that when you think about analytics, a great way to learn analytics is by doing it. And so that's the way we are partnered. So I'd be very happy to send a link to Zoe around around the website as well. And so if you just go to wca.wharton.upenn.edu, that's the website link, you will see a lot of information about the brands we've worked with. And our goal is, again, to have these collaborations with brands, products, companies that are really excited about, either analytics, to create an environment around good data analysis, all of those things. Okay, so happy to chat more if there are other questions around how we want to put. Wonderful. See, there's is there another question here? I just want to make sure. Yes, please. My email, happy to give it here as well. It's R Iyengar. So that's my first initial R and the last name Iyengar at wharton.upenn.edu. So Zoe, if you don't mind, you can happy to please send my email. Happy to continue the conversation after this session. I think we are, I'm just looking at all the questions. I believe we are done with most of the questions. So again, thank you so very much. Thank you to Zoe and the Penn Wharton China Center for this opportunity. It's a wonderful way to connect with people in many different parts of the world who are thinking about similar problems. And if you're excited about analytics, Wharton is a great place to build relationships because lots of exciting stuff is happening around analytics, not just with Wharton Customer Analytics. My colleague Eric Bradlow is also, who is in my department, marketing. He is the Vice Dean of Analytics at Wharton. So there's lots and lots of stuff that are going around analytics. Please check it out. Thank you.